All right. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Am I recording? Oh, I'm recording. Okay. Couple pieces of housekeeping information here. CCR3 is due tomorrow because I pushed back one day. If you want to submit today, that's totally fine, and it's open. So just go ahead and do it. If not, you got extra day, and if you need a little more time because of other exam or assignments and whatnot, just email me. We'll figure it out. Okay. So that's a chapter 7 or 8. And then one last piece after the classes is the CCR4 is due, and that's about chapter 9. So there's no choice about that. But I thought rather than taking that out and then adding that 4% to the final exam, you have more control over CCR, right? So I thought that I would keep it. Any question? And please, if you have a 5 minutes or so, I would really appreciate it if you can take a new survey called a SPOT, and that's student perspective on teaching, something like that. So it's supposed to be, and that's I think, okay, so I have been involved in a central discussion about how this is developed and whatnot. There's some statistical things that I want to talk about. I don't talk with you, but with the people. But it's, I think, a good change because the survey is changed from, oh, I think that was a quote unquote good course to like I learned a lot, like that. So each person's learning experience, because that's we tend to be more interested in rather than necessarily like, okay, how do you evaluate the course per se? So that's a little bit of a difference. So you may see a different question, but don't get surprised. That's what it is. So these things matter. Actually, some of us well, all of us are evaluated based on this. So I appreciate you're honest, whether it's the positive or negative feedback. But whenever I also ask, not for me, but anybody, these things are sometimes known for the biases. Okay, so especially when you know that you're completing for instructors coming from other backgrounds, like for example, you're a man and you're completing for female instructor, or vice versa, or gender queer individual, or the instructor with disability. Just think about that. Just make sure you're coming from the constructive perspective and fair, rather than talking about that particular individual or something like that. I just wanted to give a heads up. I had some time to learn about this kind of stuff. So anyway, Friday and Monday, holidays. Do not come. Do not even think about the course, okay? So hopefully, probably I shouldn't have recorded that. But go ahead, have fun. Hopefully you have some time for your own leisure and have fun. And we'll meet one more time Wednesday. So it's going to be weird today and the next week, next Wednesday. So that's in a week. Okay. So it's going to be a little bit of weird, but that's going to be the last class. We're going to finish off chapter 9 and on that day, and we'll also talk a little bit about the final exam. But you will have a lot of time to prepare for the final exam because we're 25th of April. Okay. How many final exam, by the way? Can I do the poll? 1 final. Oh, you know what? 0 final. No. Okay. 1 final. 2, 3, 4, 8, 5. 5? All right. Y'all need a little bit of emotional like swag package. Sorry. Okay. I'll give. I need a maybe cookie next time or something like that. Okay. All right. Good luck. 1 by 1. Okay. The strategy I found that works for me is to do 1 by 1 and be proactive. Okay. So scratch what I said. This weekend, if you want to work a little bit ahead for the final, 5 exam, that may be a good idea. Okay. So today we're going to talk about race, ethnicity, culture, and leisure. And that's the overview of some of the subtopics we're going to talk about in this chapter. But this acculturation, we're typically not talking about it much because well, you may remember we talked about it in RLS 100. So if you've taken it, we discussed quite extensively. Now 7 and 8, I took them out just because of the one shown on time. So if we have one more class, I would have discussed. So this lecture note is technically abbreviated version of it. So if you need these information, you send me email. I'll just give you the full notes. And if you also need our notes for like chapter 10 or chapter 11, I'll send it to you. So just let me know, okay? It's free. So if you want it, but if you're like Shin, don't worry about it. I just want to focus on, things that appear in the final exam. Let's do that. These are the things that you see in the final exam. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. This one. Okay, but before getting into the nuts and bolts of race, ethnicity, culture, and whatnot, the chapter took some time to define each terms and construct. And I think, some of those constructs you learn in a sociology course probably and whatnot, but I wanted to define it one more time for us. There might be slight difference because, well, we come from social psychological perspective here, but the sociology course, for example, come from different perspective. But probably not that different. Race, for example, is defined as social construct related to shared physical features. So there's some tie to that physical appearance, like skin color, eye shape, whatnot. Ethnicity, on the other hand, it's about the social construct again, but related to more intangible, invisible things such as language, religion, values, group values, tradition, ancestral origin, like where I am from. For example, I'm from Japan. I was born there. My ancestors are probably there. My grandpa was adopted, so I don't know actually where he is from, but maybe not. And food preferences and whatnot. So those typically intangible things until they started to speak or do stuff. And then you go, oh, okay, I see. Maybe you're from there and whatnot. So those are more of ethnicity. Now, that's easy to say, but in reality, it's a little different. Hi, Josh, you have a little different hairstyle today. Okay. Sorry. Both, because first of all, it's difficult because they're both social construct. And what that means is that it's not really about none of those things that we mentioned. It's not about how we look like, or it's not about how we speak or whatnot. It's about what it means to look like, for example, this. It's the meaning attached to it. And the meaning changes over time. As society changes, society evolves, different new, big events happen, right? Like, for example, I'll give you an example of pandemic. So me and my wife were walking, I think it was late March or early April in 2020. So that's right there, like, oh, school shut down, what are we gonna do? And no measures are still there. So we're trying to figure out, okay, what's gonna be like, right? And we're walking in a river valley, two of us. We're the only one who are literally wearing masks, or, she's Chinese, so she got the information, this is gonna be bad. So we're like, yeah, let's wear. And there's hundreds of people picnicking, jogging, it's beautiful Saturday afternoon or something like that. And then we walk, and there's this man came out with the bicycle, and he said to us, what did you bring to us, our country? And I was like, huh. And he just ran off. Biked off. And I was like, well, it's a good thing my wife even didn't catch that because he was kind of stuttering a little bit. But anyway, I was like, huh. Because that's very interesting because it really changed how I viewed the recreational space, the river valley. That, okay, so this is not my country, obviously. It's his country and their country. It is not our country. It's so easy, very interesting to me. So that's exclusion, discrimination, all that kind of stuff we talked about in chapter 8. But what's more important is this. That shows that race, for example, in this case, me being Japanese or Asian in this case, is social construct. I didn't change how I look like. Yes, I might have gained some pounds, but still, that's irrelevant, right? I didn't change how I look like. But the kind of reaction I get from some people, random people on the street, changed quite a bit. In a leisure space, changed quite a bit, right? So it's really meaning attached to it rather than what it is, quote unquote, like objectively speaking. And also race and ethnicity, they're quite often deeply intertwined. You can't just take one away from the other and talk about one. Again, for example, in our southern part of America, US, There's a strong, deep, Black culture. And obviously it's a, practiced commonly by, Black family, Black people. So that's race issue, but also there's some music styles and music preferences attached to it too. There's speech patterns. There are certain family values. Very famous jazz musician. The certain kind of music is appreciated, enjoyed. You can take that out, speech pattern from the race. So that's ethnicity, but can you take it out from the Black, quote unquote, Blackness? No, it's the part of deeply historically intertwined culture. So you can't take two apart. So it's really difficult to figure out where exactly the boundary of race and ethnicity and so on and so forth. Now we move on to the culture, and literally we have hundreds. And I think somebody counted actually, like there's at least like 400 definitions of culture in academic literature that one person could have found across disciplines. Culture can be studied by anthropologists, one of the primary group of people who are studying culture. Archaeologists, some of the archaeologists, culture studies, so there are sociologists more of, culture psychology, cross-cultural psychology, so we're psychologists. So there are many disciplines, there's dozens of definitions of culture exist in each of those things. Adding them up, literally we have over hundreds. But so it's difficult to define. But we're gonna go with, in this chapter and in this course, with this. How do you think we pronounce this name, by the way? Good. Yeah, I thought it was good enough. That's like, whoa, that's some name. Good enough, though? Good enough, maybe, or good enough. Well, good enough, Mr. Good Enough, Dr. Good Enough definition was adopted in our course and textbook. And this definition recognizes two main aspects of culture. One is phenomenal, which is about what group, each cultural group does and say commonly. And that's distinguishing them from other people, other groups. Ideational side, the other side, is about what members of group must know to be included in the group. So the social norm, cultural norms, right? And the meanings attached to what they do and what they say, and those cultural norms, what we have to know to be included. So it's one thing to, for example, know how to use, let's say, chopsticks, which is very important. If you're gonna go to East Asia, you gotta be able to use chopsticks. Yes. Japanese kids are trained on how to use chopsticks. We have 2 plates. One has small bean, uncooked, so very slippery. You get a chopsticks, your kids have to move one from the other. If you drop it somewhere besides the table, off the dish, do it over. Parents would just pour everything back and just do it over. And it's not that only you have to capture it, you have to do it in a correct way. So my sister goes like this, which is very bad. You have to be very elegant, whatever, and efficient. Anyway, so it's one thing to be able to do that, but it's another to be able to know, okay, so why it's important to have, for example, those mannerisms, right? Etiquette around the chopsticks, for example. That's another. So that's the phenomenal side and versus the ideational side. And speaking of cultural difference and culture, maybe I'm assuming many of you are either Canadians or have spent some time in Canada, right? So this side of culture, Canadian culture. And we have this southern neighbor. And they're interesting comparison group because, well, it's not like we're quote unquote so different. We're not the opposite side of the world. We're very close. We have quite a bit of, historical, political, similarities a little bit too. But there's this person, Michael Adams. He is a marketing researcher, not at the university, at the company. He did a lot of marketing research between Canada and the US, and he realized, there are very different cultural differences between Canadian markets and the US market. That might have changed though. That might have changed over the past couple decades. But I don't know if you agree with it. He identified American and Canadian culture in terms of risk. So US Americans are risk-taking. It's not that all US Americans are risk takers, but risk taking is quote unquote appreciated. It's cultural norm, right? Even if you fail, good try, nice hustle, you try it again. That's the more of a mentality, as opposed to Canadian tends to be risk adverse, as in try not to take what, like, have you thought about it twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times before actually you do that, whatever the investment, for example. Canadians tend to be accommodating rather than the aspirational. Aspiration means like there's, American dream narrative. There's something good, great, you aspire to it, you aim high. Accommodating tends to be more about more socialistic ideology. Try to make sure that everybody's included and whatnot. Money. For US American, money is a symbol of success. It's a very important thing in life, if not the most important thing. For Canadian, typically, traditionally at least, money was a suspect. Okay, you're saying this is free. Ooh, I don't know. Suspicious. Or somebody's making like a gazillions of dollars. Ooh, what are you doing? What's the job? American system, capitalism, very strong capitalism. Winner takes it all. You're successful, you're super rich. That's the dream. Canadian system, more socialistic, about income distribution, redistribution, meaning take some from the people who have and redistribute it, share with people who don't necessarily have. And finally, humor. American tends to prefer put down humor. You know what the put down humor is? Huh?
Like a roast.
Roast, like basically roasting other people, right? American comedians sometimes make fun of other people, and that's the humor, right? Comedy. Versus Canadian humor tends to be more of a self-effacing, as in like you make fun of yourself a little bit. You put down yourself a little bit too, and then just a little bit of like it's fun still. Which one do you identify more? I don't know if you're Canadian. Maybe some of you are secretly American. That's cool. Are you on the Canadian side? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's good. All right. But I think so. That's a cultural difference, I guess. And another terminology we use related to race ethnicity in Canada is this thing called a visible minority. Okay, and I have nothing against it actually. Now that's the quote from the chapter. Visible minorities are people who are non-white and non-Aboriginal. Well, you might have picked up, ooh, what do you mean by Aboriginal? We're gonna come back to that. And they further define not Indian. Well, that's actually wrong. It should be First Nation, not First Nation, not Métis, nor Inuit. Okay, so that's visible minority. Did you know that visible minority in Canada do not include Indigenous people? Do not. Okay. If you see in statistics, which you will use probably a lot in your future career, sports using a lot, tourism using that a lot, community recreation using that a lot, park too. Visible minority is one of the big data, and I want to talk about today, but it does not include Indigenous people. Okay, it doesn't mean that they're excluded or de-emphasized. They have their own category, because they deserve. That's the attitude. Now, visible minority is the official language that the Canadian government uses. Now, this Aboriginal people or the Aboriginal, that's also the official term still existing in the Canadian Constitution. So when I use Aboriginal, I mean I'm specifically talking about Constitution, okay? The formal language, the foundational language. But except that, we're going to talk in the next slide. We should be using another word. Now, they're not included in this visible minority category when we talk about statistics, census, whatnot, because of their unique history and relationship with the Canadian government. Of course, that doesn't mean unique as in good. Unique as in traumatic. Now the government, the contemporary government, not the constitution that was made hundreds of years ago, but the Canadian government and the world, for example, United Nations, we have moved on to use more inclusive language called Indigenous. Okay, so that's the preferred term, unless unless you meet certain people and they say, oh, we'd like to be referred to as certain tribal name, for example, community name, right? And of course, that's the word that we should be using. But except that, indigenous is the quote unquote, polite expression, the more inclusive expression right now. Now, in Canada, by indigenous, we typically mean these three main groups: First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Probably you know that. That's good. Now, that's all. Hopefully that kind of categorizes, okay, what are we exactly, whom we're talking about with the different language. Now, to make it a little more complicated, there are some issues. First of all, there's something called a pan-ethnicity or pan-culture, that things that cuts across different groups, couple different groups. And typically that's related to regional group. For example, me and my wife, we often get this, that when we're talking in English to each other, people go like, why don't you speak in your own language? Well, I'm Japanese, she's Chinese. Sure, we look like this, but anyway. But then we also share something. So we can't communicate. Japanese and Chinese, by the way, they're totally very different languages. So we can't really communicate orally, okay? But we can both use chopsticks very well, okay? And we love if we have to choose some Asian noodle from that Edo place on the sub versus probably some sort of other, I don't know, Subway. Probably we're choosing Edo just because that's the kind of flavor we like it. That's not Japanese, folks. That's not Japanese, really. It's kind of mishmash of like the Chinese, Japanese, Korean, I don't know. It's Asian food, But it's still that there's a regionality that we both appreciate, that kind of taste palette. And, we both be able to use, for example, chopsticks and whatnot. So there's just something that cuts across Japanese, Chinese, South Korean, whatnot, for example. Right? That's what we are talking about when it comes to pan-ethnic. And also, on the other hand, we shouldn't be, quote unquote, the chapter pointed out, we shouldn't homogenize members of each group. And that's the tricky part. So, okay, so then the Asian people, that's good. Right? We create something for Asians, something for Black people, and that's the big, massive group, and that's going to be good. No, we have to recognize that there's intra-group, right? Within group differences, quite a bit too, right? Depending on which country, for example, which country they're from or which generation they're from, right? For example, Black immigrants or Black settlers here who came 2 generations ago versus this generation, first generation, they're very different. They came to Canada for very different reasons sometimes, okay? So we have to recognize that. For example, like indigenous people, they have hundreds of different languages, knowledge base, relationship, belief system, so on and so forth. So recognizing that, listening to each can be very important when you actually do effective programming. Yes, Dion. Yes, it's a Faculty of Native Studies.
Or is it Indigenous Studies?
That's an interesting question, actually. I don't know. I'm pretty sure they have had probably that conversation, that whether they should change the name. Yeah, well, that's the more inclusive way to say. Yeah. But they may have their own. So maybe you want to take one of the course and ask a professor, and I was very keen. I'm pretty sure they had that discussion. But I can see though, if they want to change the actual name of the major, because the faculty name is also a degree major name, if you have to change, you actually have to go to over the river and to all the paperwork, hundreds of pages actually with the government. So that may be one of the reasons, but shouldn't be. They may want to change actual name. There may be discussion. Now that's all the definitions. And now the chapter talk about okay, why do we care about leisure studies? Well, studies of leisure and practices of leisure services for racial minority, cultural minority, ethnic minority, so on and so forth. And the chapter cite a couple of different reasons, 2 major reasons. And one is that, quote unquote, our society, North American society, the Western society, whatever you want to call, we have seen major demographic changes over the past several decades. We're getting increasingly more diverse. Therefore, understanding different leisure across different groups helps us to be a better practitioner, better marketer, better programmers, better policymakers to actually effectively work with those people. For example, this is a very important number because that's based on a 2021, the newest census that just came out. It took a long time for them to publish it. But the visible minority accounted for 26.5% of the entire Canadian population. And that's higher, and that's a historic higher. In a Canadian history ever, this is the highest number. And it's projected to increase. And I will share that information as well. Okay. And once again, that does not include Indigenous people. Okay. The biggest group are South Asians, so typically like Indian people from India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, so on and so forth. Chinese people, Black people, the Filipino people are really 3, not 4, actually largest groups. And obviously you can see these. Do you find something weird about these categorization? That's the categorization from government, but you look at these South Asian, Chinese, Black, Filipino. Do you feel those categories are somewhat uneven? And if so, how? Siri, go ahead. Yeah, so Chinese is typical with a national background. South Asian is regional, right? There's multiple countries in it. Anything else? The same thing with their, go ahead, Curtis. Exactly, too. That they're right there too. So Black typically is more of a race. It's about the race, right? But the Black people can be from anywhere. They could be from, well, they could be from here, but they could be from also African continent. They could be from actually South American continent and Central American continent. There are Black people in there, right? Quite dominantly. So they're kind of mishmash. So it's not easily comparable. Like we can't just say like, I mean, Chinese and Filipino, they're just single countries. So we can't necessarily say, oh, they're not that big. No, they're quite big actually. So in Alberta, the rate was actually 27.8. So that's higher than national average, right? You don't have to exactly remember that number, but I need you to remember this one too. In Edmonton, 2021, it's over 40% visible minority. Once again, that does not include Indigenous people. To add that, 40%. And in Toronto, Vancouver, they passed 50% easily already. Probably you can see that. And there were visible minority projected to be even increased more by 2041. So how old are you going to be in 2041? I want you to think about it. How old would you be in 2041? 37. Wait, what do you? I thought we're about same, no? Okay. In 2041, how old would you be? Right? If you're comfortable, just let me know. And I go like, oh my God. Oh my God. Huh? 42, 47, okay, 47. Math is hard. You said something like 34. Oh my God. All right. 54, okay, cool. You said a 47, 42. So you're hitting, okay, so my point is that you're going to be hitting, oh, I know it's depressing. No, it's not depressing. It's good. You're going to have a good time, in 2041. You may have family, you may not have family. That's totally cool. My hope for you, and I think you can, is that you're going to be in that professional stage where you're going to making a big decision, right? Strategic decision. This is what the society you'll be facing. Make sense? The entire Canadian population, 41% are visible minority. Once again, not even including Indigenous people. In the big cities, this is national average. So typically in a big city like Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, Toronto, They're way much higher. Probably by then, 60%, 70%. Right? That's the population, that's the group you will be serving, whether you like it or not. It doesn't matter. It's just, it's gonna be a fact. Okay, so are you prepared to sell your products and services to them? That you know the language, you know what they like, do you know what they don't like, and so on and so forth. Obviously, things are going to change in about 20 years, but Also, in terms of indigenous people, I think that's very important too. The 2021 census accounted for 1.8 million indigenous people across the nation. It has increased, which accounted for about 5% of the total population. And by 2041, it is actually projected to increase further to 2.8 million. The main reasons of these increases is that more and more people are self-identifying as indigenous, okay? And there's actually higher fertility rate among the indigenous people as well. So that's the contributing factors. It's increasing trend. I want you to know that it's increasing trend. The numbers of indigenous people are particularly high in urban areas like Edmonton, Winnipeg, Toronto, the Greater Toronto area, very high. So many indigenous people actually live in urban area these days. And for example, in Edmonton, indigenous people are made up 6.2% of the entire population. So distinct group, they're increasing as well. So that's another thing that we have to be aware of. And then second factor, the reason why we have to be aware of racist ethnicity culture is this global change outside of our quote unquote Western society. Maybe you're not from Western society, so that's good. You may know more. But our world is going through changes, especially economically and population-wise. That we're seeing faster global economic growth in quote unquote non-Western areas. Probably you know that. And a faster population increases in, for example, Africa. So these blue, greenish, they're higher reproductive, more population growth in there. Africa, Middle East, South Asia, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia, as well as Australia. This is where more people, there are more and more people. And that's the projection of the economy, GDP. That was what it was, 2022. Okay, top 15 GDP in the world. And that's what I want you to understand, 2050. Once again, think about where you will be in your career in 2050. That's where probably many of you are hitting that executive position, senior manager position. Probably you're making an important decision. That's the world you will be living, most likely. Something like this. They're somewhat different from 2022 quite a bit. China is #1 economy. India is #3, would it be? Indonesia, Southeast Asian country, big economy right now. Germany there, dropping its rank. Japan dropping its rank. UK dropping its rank. Brazil coming up, right? That's the world. And there are actually more big economy, blooming here. Mexico, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Canada is right here, and Nigeria. I will be dead by 2075. That's my plan. So I don't worry so much about this, but you'll be retired by 2075 too. So that's fine. But if you look at it, it's like, yeah, that's my plan. I have my life plan, just die by 20. But this one, look at it. It's very different. China, India, US, Indonesia, Nigeria, Pakistan. Pakistan is a big country too, population-wise. Egypt. It's a different world coming. So your field is going to change too. Why? Because, well, this has at least two implications. One, the first thing we all talk about demographic change means that we have more immigrants, refugees, asylees, and whatnot. come to North America. And there are many of your field, for example, sports, there is a national now policy to actually serve these group more better. We have national emphasis. We have money, millions of dollars, billions of dollars coming into that actually, right? Or more tourists from not just from China, India, maybe more Pakistanis, so on and so forth. Sorry, I didn't find a better picture of like, tourists to Edmonton. Apparently, we're not doing a great job, actually. I can only find the Toronto, so, but anyway. Hopefully that will change in about 10 years, 20 years. We'll get a lot of people here, okay? So quite simply, that's also money, to be honest. Okay, so I want you to know that. You know what the Dr. Liang was talking about the, older adults? This is also another industry. So what about the research? What do we know about these, group of people in terms of leisure so far? Well, not much. That's the answer. Okay. There are some overview of the research about this issue. Myron Freud, who is researcher at the North Carolina State University, he and his colleagues conducted a literature review of over 3,300 leisure article, like a leisure journal papers, up to 2005. So that's been a while. We should update that. And they found only 5%, actually less than 5%, focused on their race or ethnicity. Now you might see this title. It's the title of the paper. Yes, it is. Razul Murad is also another professor in the North Carolina State. He moved from Indiana to there. They conducted a couple different things, examined graduate students and their demographic, identity, racial, ethnic identity of the people who are getting kin degree, KSR type of degree in US, not Canada. It's disproportionately less diverse compared to the general population. So that's there. And they also pointed out that the faculty member or the researcher who is doing these research is also less diverse compared to the quote unquote general public, which probably is one of the contributing reason why you see this kind of number. Have you looked at their faculty profile of KSR? You can do it. You can go to the website and there's a research about us, and then you can go to faculty and you can do like professors and other categories. You can go in there, and most of us have pictures. And of course, pictures don't tell everything, as you know, like especially Métis people and whatnot, it doesn't tell everything. And you can see the name. What I'm saying is that you don't see a lot of diversity. But I think over the past few years, we have done great. We have hired new faculty members who are increasingly more diverse, which is important. And that's a U of A strategic planning as well. So I'm very happy to see it. But we are not far away from this. That's what I'm saying. So that's an issue too. Ito and a colleague also conducted a review about 2,000 papers or so from 1990 to 2009. And their focus was this, okay, how many papers focus on non-Western and or some sort of cross-cultural, cross-national, some sort of comparison, even including Western, then about 4%. And they made this very, very, to me, interesting quote. They said over 90% of the leisure research still focus on only slightly more than 10% of the global population. 90%, 10%, it's almost inverse. Makes sense, flipped. And what's important, yes, some of those leisure journals are meant to be international journals. They're accepting paper from everywhere in the world, okay? Gordon Walker, who is retired professor, he updated this review, and he found that actually from 2010 to 2019, so the last decade or so, the proportion increased to actually 9.21%. So it's more than double. So it's increasing, good trend. This means we're on an increasing trend. We're doing better. Yay. But maybe not as much as we could be. We have a little more things to do, definitely. Okay, I am gonna stop here. Some of you have an exam today, right? Right after this? Yeah. Okay, I'll stop here because I was talking a lot today. Sorry, I realized I was just talking a lot, but so I'm gonna stop here. We're gonna finish off the other parts next class Wednesday, and I will quickly talk about their probably final exam. But most likely I won't have a whole lot about final exam because, well, the exam is on April 25th, but I will put the study guide and also I will put the sample stuff. So if you have any questions, you can always email me, okay? All right. Anyway, so you get extra 10 minutes today. Study for the exam. Good luck. Never give up. You will not leave questions blank, okay? You promise with me. You write something in there, okay? And then I'll be proud of you. That's important. It's important. You never give up. Bye, Kia.